You're listening to The Discovery Pod, a podcast dedicated to conversations with leaders in the social profit sector. Discover the origin stories of CEOs, founders, and other senior leaders and learn from them so you can accomplish what is most important. Now, on with the show with your host, Douglas Nelson.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Discovery Pod, Conversations with Social Profit Leaders. I'm your host, Doug Nelson. I'm thrilled today to have a truly exceptional social profit leader with us here to share her story and the story of her organization, Erna Grasz, the founder and CEO of Asante Africa Foundation. Welcome, Erna.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
Well, I think your story is one that our listeners will really get a lot out of. And for those that aren't familiar, maybe you could start with telling us a little bit about what Asante Africa is.
Yes. Asante Africa Foundation is a grassroots managed and a globally guided nonprofit. And we are intimately focused not only on the academic education, but the life education of young people in East Africa. And our point and purpose is to help these young people develop the skills that as they go through their adolescent years and their teen years, they graduate academically, but with skills that will launch them into a career and a profession they love and enjoy, as well as potentially starting a small business that would support the emerging economy not in the urban areas, but where they live, their local rural communities.
Oh, that's really powerful. And you have a fairly big ambition for the organization and what you're accomplishing.
Yes, we do. We've given ourselves a target over the next few years to achieve 1 million lives impacted through our different programs.
And where are you at today?
We're about 500,000 and growing exponentially. So it's exciting, stressful, and intense at all levels.
So you're building the exit velocity on this strategy.
Yes.
That's great. Now, tell me, how do you measure a life impacted?
So in the donor world, quite often, there's a tremendous focus put on the number. And as a global board and organization, we do not want to compromise the quality of the life impacted for a number. For us, that means a young 8th grade girl in rural Kenya that would have been married off a couple of years ago is now midway through her high school career and developing economic skills. For a young child who was sitting home because he or she couldn't pay school fees, now they're graduating with academics able to launch them into a university profession. So it's exciting.
Wow, that's really, really powerful. Now, you mentioned global board. One of the things I find really fascinating about your organization is how you have managed to really distribute responsibility and ownership of the organization into the countries where you're doing your work. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. From the very beginning of this organization, we did not believe in an outside-in approach. And I co-founded the organization with a Kenyan woman and a Tanzanian woman. And at that time, we set up 3 boards, a dedicated governing board in Tanzania, a dedicated governing board in Kenya, and a dedicated fundraising board in the United States. And what is truly critical to our success is that these 3 boards co-manage, co-govern against a global common mission that we put together initially in 2007 and then revamped it in 2015.
That's really interesting. That's not how a lot of organizations that are doing work in Africa operate now. It's a difficult choice that you made, but was it worth it?
It was, and it is worth it because no outside-in solution works. If it is not passionately owned and protected from within the communities and the country where the work is happening, it will wither out and it will die.
How do you build that commitment in the communities that you're working with?
Well, our organization only employs local people within these communities, and our staff comes from these rural communities. Many of our young people who graduate come back and work for us either as interns, staff, or support staff longer term. And we're passionate that we work hard not to think like Americans. We work hard not to think how we would solve the problem. And I will say one of my founding partners was brilliant because she used to say, Erna, you're thinking like an American. That's not how we think here. That early on shifted the framework of the solutions have to be created and developed by those living in the community. And then we make sure they have the skills and the tools in their toolkit to implement those solutions toward keeping children in school, minimizing any negative effects in the community with patriarchal societies, girls potentially getting married off at an early age. How do we walk alongside them to collectively tackle the challenges they're getting in their way?
That must be a very, very difficult balance and one that you've learned over time. So let's go. But you mentioned founding it with two other women. Go back to 2006 when you're starting the organization. Where does the idea come from? How does Asante Africa come into being?
My husband had a bucket list dream of climbing Kilimanjaro. And while we were in Tanzania, my first co-founder, we met her. Her name was Emmy Moshi. And she was a young 30-something trying to start a safari business. And at the time, she wasn't even able to purchase a vehicle. And then on the same trip, I met a woman in Kenya who was one of the very first school principals who happened to be a Maasai woman from the Maasai tribe. And I was so inspired by these two young 30-something women with big vision and trying to navigate a really complicated path to their vision. So I came back home. I was a vice president of research and development for a medical device company. I sit in an hour and a half commute each direction to the office, and usually it's at 5 a.m. in the morning. So who else is awake at 5 in the morning but Emmy or Helen? And while I'm sitting on the freeway, I'm just mentoring and listening to their challenges. And then about a year in, we began to think about, is there a way that this triad of slightly crazy women could create an organization that wasn't driven by the Western culture, but was led by the African culture and supported by Western culture of people who wanted to do good but didn't know how. And that's how it began. A year in, we started small, and for quite a few years, I kept my corporate role and supported them as part of my night job.
That's quite an undertaking, a side gig, I think we call that now.
Side gig, yeah, side hustle.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. So that transition from high-powered corporate executive on the road to get to work at 5 a.m. in the morning to visionary social profit leader. Not a light switch, I assume. Tell us a little bit about what that meant for you and the process you went through.
I would actually say that transition is one of the most humbling, gut-wrenching, transformative transitions I personally have gone through. For me, my entire ego was attached to being an executive vice president, to big stock options, to being one of the only women in Silicon Valley and frequently asked to speak on panels and all the accolades that go along with being a successful woman executive in a male-dominated world. And to transition to a nonprofit sector where quite frequently is perceived as a ladies' lunch club initiative. It was gut-wrenching. And I remember when I first was in this transition, I remember saying, people would say, "Hi, what do you do?" And I would say, "Well, I used to be a vice president of research and development at XYZ company, And now I've transitioned to being a CEO of a nonprofit. And they'd be like, oh, why would you do that? And it took me quite a while to get comfortable in this new skin and just own it and just say, look, all those skills from all the years prior have made me the transformative leader that I think I can be today, and help transfer those skills equally to people who have transformative visions but don't have that mentor. It was tough. It was a couple tough years.
You said you were changing your skin. Was there a moment, or was there a time when you realized the first time you introduced yourself as CEO of Asante Africa and not as what I used to be?
And I still fall into it sometimes today. It depends on, I think the thing about being an electrical engineer, how I actually introduce myself is that I am a previous systems engineer who has become a systems social entrepreneur. The world has very complex problems to solve, and there is no one single-stranded solution. So we have to look at the system problem from a systems solution perspective and tackle it from multiple directions for it to succeed. So at the end of the day, all the engineering skills come into play, but I don't know if there was one pivotal moment yet.
One of the things in all that you've described that comes through is there's immense complexity in the organization, dealing with rural communities in multiple countries, trying to forge and sustain this new model of working in Africa for your donor base and your board here in North America. How do you manage that complexity?
Thank goodness for technology. Technology allows the staff in all three countries to feel like one team. And technology allows us to make sure we're all working on common documents, common strategy. But probably the most critical piece to this was recognizing up front that we needed a global plan that we all believed in. And in 2013, we brought in PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, to help us develop a global governance structure across the three boards at that level and help us define what would the roles and responsibilities be below those three boards. Then again in 2015, PwC came in and helped us put the organizational structure in place, not only for a single year, but a transitional model that would grow and stretch between 2015 and 2022 so that the programmatic leadership would firmly sustain and reside in East Africa. And every year our board all three boards come together in June, and we stare each other eyeball to eyeball. And we say, oh man, where did we crash and burn this last year? What are we going to learn from that to lift us up for this next year? And we get a recommitment every year to the plan. We are now starting to feel like 2021 is too close. So this year we will come together and begin to work on the 2025-2027 plan. And so it's that constant check-in and it's the constant links between the boards and the staff to make sure the staff has the support they need in all three countries.
One of the things that I really liked about how you described that is let's come together and talk about where we crash and burn, or what are the mistakes that we've made, that you're really building a learning organization that's focusing on getting the right answer, not on being right, which can be very difficult in complex organizations, or really in any organization. Where do you find the space, or how do you take a deep breath and recognize all of the positive things that you've accomplished?
That's a tough question. I have learned early in my career that when you lead a large organization and the problems you're solving are difficult and complex, celebrating is really key. In my world, celebrating is how we we honor that we're headed in the right direction. And celebrating incremental success builds the confidence of all the players on the team that, oh, we made progress. Oh, we're actually over halfway to our big, hairy goal.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, we work hard to celebrate, and we work hard to learn lessons from things that don't go quite right so that we build trust amongst ourselves as a team, and we honor and recognize that there are rocks in our road, that this is not going to be a straight path. We honor and recognize that some days we're going to have to go over, under, around, and even through those big rocks. So celebrating in some cases is that we got over the rock. And in other cases, it's, oh, wow, we found a new creative approach to solving this problem.
Your leadership vision and your style really comes out in your answer to that question. Let me ask sort of underneath that. So that's how you remind others and show others that on this journey with you, how collectively you're achieving those successes. How do you remind yourself that you're making those successes?
I make sure that I'm in country frequently, and I make sure that I spend time with the young people that we work with. I'm a storyteller, so I'm going to share 2 stories with you. I will never forget meeting with a young woman who's blind in one eye and so in a sense, very disabled in the African culture. And she has been in our programs for about 4 years. And she has started her own nonprofit and her own radio station program talking about taboo subjects in a rural community. And I remember Emily telling me, she said, do not call me a beneficiary. I am the change agent that you have been helping us become. And it was in that moment that I realized even just the words we use severely can hamper others' progress. So the other story that I will share is that we have a young man who was sitting at home in a mud hut, and today he's in his 3rd year of becoming a heart surgeon. And when you sit and talk to his mother and father, they are living the dream that they never thought possible. And so for me, when I am with these parents and teachers and students, the impact becomes very real. And that's what fuels me, because they're becoming the change agents.
Yeah, that is really powerful. And I imagine those, you're probably walking a few feet off the ground when you finish those conversations with parents like that.
Yes, and then I come home and I can dig back into the QuickBook.
Yeah. The 5 a.m. conference calls that haven't changed and all of those things. Yeah, absolutely. The things that I really admire about you, Erna, is that you have really persevered. And one of the challenges with a lot of organizations, especially organizations that are doing work in Africa, is that they have a great first 2 or 3 years. And the going gets really tough. The rocks become too high to get over and organizations fade away. There are lots of successful ones, or many successful ones, but many more that really don't get to the stage of maturity that Asante Africa has gotten to. So you've learned a lot. You've traveled a path that many have set out on, and very few have gotten as far as you have. Tell me something that you've learned that almost no one agrees with.
Ooh, I think what I've learned is that it's more important to go slow so that the local leaders who work for Asante Africa, Kenya and Tanzania, can claim the successes as their own is the most paramount success. There are a lot of organizations who have grown much bigger than we have, but they've forced it from the Western side. And what I truly know is that when Erna phases out, these organizations are pedaling 100 miles an hour on their own accord. They've learned to fundraise. They've learned to manage staff. They've learned to negotiate with the big funders. They've learned to think strategically. They've learned to stand up at international conferences representing our work as thought leaders themselves. And there is a big disagreement. There's a lot of blah, blah, blah in the nonprofit echo chamber, I'll call it, where all these funders and nonprofit leaders come together and talk at each other. But at the end of the day, it's about living and teaching and mentoring what's said at those conferences. And it's not about the Westerners representing the work. It's about the African leaders solving the problems themselves and getting the credit for the work themselves. I think one of the biggest battles I had with a larger funder early on was when the funder wanted me to put a white person, a Westerner, in the local office so that communications could be easier for the donor. And I said no. And we lost our funding because it was too hard for the funder to work alongside a young, struggling organization trying to stretch and grow. So it's a tough road, but there's such hunger and intensity and pride. And one of the things that one of my staff members said that gives me a lot of pride, someone asked them, "Oh, this is a Western organization, isn't it?" And Zakayo, who's our accountant in Tanzania, he said, "No, this is a locally led organization and we are the leaders." And it was in that moment that I knew we are creating a legacy.
Oh, that's great, Erna. Thank you for sharing that. So on the Discovery Pod, we talk a lot about governance. We have to admire someone who not only created one board, but 3 boards to report to and to work with. So I compliments to you on that. Final thing, what would you say to someone who has a really personally transformative experience and says, I'm going to start an organization. I'm going to found an organization. What advice would you give to that person?
Don't.
You must have had a number of those conversations. People must approach you. So you've done this. Tell me how I can do this. Give me the kit.
Oh, weekly. My Kenya chairman of the board, he said, "You know, Erna, if this were easy, everyone would do it. And we wouldn't need leaders." I think the reason that I say don't, what I mean by that is don't not take action, but take action through visionary, transformative leaders who are already making strides and help them go faster. Be an accelerant versus being a starter. And there are brilliant, talented, visionary leaders in these developing countries who need acceleration, doors opened, dots connected. Do that. Don't start from scratch.
I like that. Be the accelerant and don't worry about being the one holding the match. I think that's really great advice. Listen, Erna, if anybody wants to learn more about Asante Africa and join you on this path, how can they learn more about the organization?
Well, the easiest step is join our social media. Our website is asanteafrica.org. And we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. And you can always just drop an email to info@asanteafrica.org and we can get you connected.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for being a part of the Discovery Pod.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Discovery Pod. Be sure to tune in next week for another inspiring and informative conversation. Don't forget to visit our website, thediscoverygroup.ca, for more resources. If you like what you just listened to, please subscribe and tell a friend about it. Until next time, keep working to make your organization exceptional.